Alrighty, good evening, everybody. We are live today with our very last online review session for the year, and it's the SOL, the big SOL review session tonight. So make sure you are checking this on demand. If you're joining us live, we thank you for joining us live. If you are joining us on demand, of course, you know it's on demand anytime, so you can start and stop as you go. But as for right now, we are going to answer some of your questions. Now, as a reminder, a little bit different this time. Instead of on the YouTubes and instead of on the using the chat feature on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to go ahead and use the Google Doc that I have made available for you. Now, if you want to use the Google Doc, all you got to do is click on the link here on YouTube, or you can go to the Blackboard site and ask your questions there. Just checked it, so we do got a bunch of questions on there already. So thank you to, those of you who answered those questions already. That was very kind of you, very good of you to do that. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Question number one is about which countries were British mandates and which countries were French mandates. A good question. Your British mandates and French mandates come about after the World War I, when Britain and France are still holding on to their empires, they're still maintaining them, and what they're doing is they are using their territory to kind of acquire more land. So the French mandates versus the British mandates. The French mandates are going to be the main one, of course, is going to be Syria. Now, that's going to be located in the northern part of the Middle East, right south of Turkey. So if we look at the, let me see what I got here. It's kind of hard to tell on my little globe here, but so if we look at Turkey's right over there, of course, right below that is going to be Syria. And then Iraq is going to be your British mandate, and then after that is going to be Palestine. Today we know as Israel, and that is going to be your British mandate. So there's a bunch of different mandates on there, but those are the ones that seemingly get most people confused. Would be the British mandates and the French mandates. That's a good question looking at that. So good question over there. Question number two, who was Erasmus and who was Cervantes? Erasmus and Cervantes. Erasmus was, back in the day, he was a Renaissance writer. And Erasmus wrote a book called The Praise of Folly. And that's a humanist writing. And the idea behind that humanist writing is the fact that it's kind of not talking about religion. It's not talking about anything really else. It's a work that's focusing on individualities. It's focusing on realism, and it's this first idea of humanism that we see going on in the world. So we look at Erasmus, The Praise of Folly. Now, Cervantes is our Spanish writer who wrote the book Don Quixote. And Don Quixote is about it's about this guy who is, the expression is that's used all the time is that he tilts at windmills. And the tilting at windmills goes to the idea that here's this guy who wants to go back to the days of the medieval times, and he sees these windmills and he thinks they're dragons, and he goes on these missions and things. But the idea here is that it was poking fun of the Middle Ages and poking fun of that time frame. But Cervantes with Don Quixote, some believe that is considered the first real work of fiction, but that is Cervantes. He wrote Don Quixote, the famous Spanish novella. Question number two, who first invented the calendar? That could go a long ways. We look at the Arabic calendar. We take a look at that. We look at the Mayan calendar as well. But in terms of European history, we're going to be looking at or world history, we're going to be looking more so that the Arabic calendar came to the old world through trading purposes. So we'll go ahead and look at that. Question number 4, what was the Edict of Nantes? The Edict of Nantes was a religious document that stops the Catholics and the Protestants from fighting. So the Edict of Nantes was a document that was created by the French government, to say, we have been fighting for so long in our country between the Huguenots and between the Catholics. And what we need to do is we need to take our fighting between the Huguenots and the Catholics, and we need to go ahead and stop that fighting from happening. And so what the Edict of Nantes said was that Protestants, specifically, of course, in France, they're going to be French Huguenots, which we know as Calvinists, that they are going to be allowed to worship. However, they can worship, but and they can worship freely. But it's not this idea that like it's okay, yeah, great, awesome, you can go ahead and do this. It's not a true religious freedom per se. There was just the idea that it was basically this truce. We won't kill you, you won't kill us. Let's just kind of stop there. And that was kind of the idea behind the Edict of Nantes, the stopping of fighting between the French Catholics and the French Calvinists, otherwise known as Huguenots. And a reminder, this is a time period where there's a lot of stuff going on. Number 5, what was the what was the Peace of Augsburg, and what was the difference between it and the Edict of Nantes? So the Peace of Augsburg and the Edict of Nantes are two completely different things. The Edict of Nantes occurs in France. The Peace of Augsburg is going to occur in what we would know today as in the German area. And that is going to end the 30 Years' War. And the idea behind that is the French, who are Catholic, should be fighting against the Protestants. But in actuality, they're fighting other Catholics, other Holy Roman Empire members, because they want, Cardinal Richelieu here, wants the French to be as strong as possible. So interestingly enough, here we see Cardinal Richelieu, a cardinal, an official in the Catholic Church, who's actually siding with Protestants in order to make sure their idea is spread and not, or their kind of power is spread and not their Catholic power. So it's kind of interesting to see that happen, but that's the Peace of Augsburg, 30 Years' War, major battles between the Catholics and the Protestants, in which not all the time the Catholics were fighting on the same side. Question number 6, what was the Congress of Vienna? Who led it? What impact did it have? And what were its goals? The Congress of Vienna is formed post-Napoleon. Napoleon is gone. Napoleon is defeated. He is out of here. Sorry, one last time just to help you guys out here. Napoleon is defeated. That's right. Napoleon is defeated, and he is kicked out. He's gone for not just the first time, but the second time. So he's officially gone now. He's on St. Helena doing his thing. The idea here, though, is that what do you do with all of this land that was conquered by Napoleon? There are some that say what we should do is that we should divide it and give it to the people, that the people should get control of it. There are others that say, no, it was a part of the kingdoms. Let's go ahead and give it back to the kingdoms. Well, what happens at the Congress of Vienna is that the people get together and, the people meaning the kings, they get together and they decide to make a series of decisions. And those decisions that are made are says the following. Number 1, that we are going to restore the monarchy. So this is a victory for the conservatives. The conservatives at this time were those people that supported the monarchs. So we see the monarchs be in control at this time. The second thing it decides is that since France was so big, what we need, and so powerful, what we need to do is we need to surround France with countries of equal power, so that way no one country could have so much power again like Napoleon. So the idea was to have countries of equal power, because bullies don't bully people above them. They don't bully people next to them. They bully people below them. So the idea here is to make sure that the countries are of equal size, And if the countries are in equal size, then the best way to kind of handle that is to do a kind of equal power share there. And of course, what we see as well is that the Congress of Vienna puts monarchs back in charge. So it's a victory for the monarchs, the conservatives. It's a defeat for the liberals, and to some extent, it's a defeat for the nationalists as well. Now, the person who led this conference was a guy by the name of Metternich, and he was in control of that conference. That was the Congress of Vienna. Good question. Number 7, what was the legacy of Napoleon after his death? A legacy of Napoleon. Napoleon's legacy was really 2 factors, and that was the Napoleonic Code. And the Napoleonic Code kind of embraced this idea that everybody is equal before the law. The idea that people should be held responsible for the law, that people should be treated equally before the law. This idea of Napoleonic Code was really big, a really big part of Napoleon. The other legacy of Napoleon was probably this Continental System, which we see a little bit going on today in the form of the European Union. The Continental System was Napoleon's idea to have all of Europe act together against England. That was kind of the idea. And we kind of see that going on today with the European Union. But that's the major idea, is this Napoleonic Code and kind of having this, this equality before the law. So that was a big deal. Question number 8 is next. The revolutions of 1848. This goes very close in line with the Congress of Vienna. So the Congress of Vienna comes in, they put these monarchs in power, and then we see in 1848 a series of revolutions in which the people begin to demand more and more rights. This is after the American Revolution, this is after the French Revolution, and people are demanding rights. It goes back to the ideas of the Enlightenment. They want their rights. And what we see happen in the revolutions of 1848, time and time again, whether it's in France, whether it's in what we know as Germany, whether it's what we know now in Italy, what we know happens all the time is this. The liberals will get out there and say, we want rights, and we want liberty and all this great stuff. And they have all these declarations. But at the end of the day, as we talked about so much this year, gun beats paper. In a game of rock, paper, scissors, gun beats paper all the time. And the conservatives, the kings, are the ones that are in control of the military. They control the military, which means they control what happens, and that is it. Fiend done over is what we see happen with that time. So the idea here is what's going to happen next then. And so what does come out of the revolutions of 1848, though, is there is this nationalistic pride that comes out, that people begin to focus more on their area in which they live. And they develop a love of their area. They develop a love of their culture. They develop a love of their language. And what we see happen in 1848's revolution is that even though the liberals lose in 1848, this idea of a national pride grows and grows. And that's where we're going to start to see, when we look at imperialism, when we look at colonialization, we're going to start to see this pride build up more and more. But the foundations of it are laid in the 1848 revolutions. Unsuccessful for the liberals, but successful for nationalist feelings. Question number 9, what were the causes of the worldwide depression? That fasts forward to the Great Depression. A couple big things were going to be the leading of the Depression. Probably the biggest thing was the fact that there was a worldwide oversupply of goods. By the end of the 1920s, World War I is officially behind the world, and countries are starting to make stuff again. Well, for years, America was making stuff as the world was kind of coming up, reacquainting themselves, if you will, with this idea of the kind of coming out of World War I. Well, what happens is, now that there's so much stuff out there, companies aren't getting the same value. So there's an oversupply. People are buying on credit, which means they're buying now, paying later. We have a stock market crash. So if you're keeping track, we got an oversupply of goods. We got an expansion of credit. We have the stock market crash in America. And then we have something called the Haole-Smoot Tariff. And the Haole-Smoot Tariff was when we saw this collapse, this utter collapse in trading in the world. Because what the Haole-Smoot Tariff does is it places a series of tariffs on foreign goods. America places tariffs on goods coming from Europe. Europe places goods coming from America. And what we see happen is a global slowdown in trade. America wants to protect American goods. That's why they place the tariffs on European goods. And Europe wants to protect European goods, which is why they place a tariff on American goods. But the problem is this whole thing causes major problems because of the idea of the tariffs. And that's a big deal at this time. Tariffs kill the trade, worldwide trade going on. And that is why we see that global slowdown. All right, moving along here. Question number 10. What did Margaret Thatcher do in the fight against communism? Margaret Thatcher was allied very strongly with Ronald Reagan, who was our president that kind of changed the scope of fighting against communism. He kind of took us away from containment and kind of really talked more about how communism is evil and the evils of communism, how it needs to be changed and how it needs to be fixed and taken away. But when we look at the idea of Margaret Thatcher and what she did, she spoke out against communism in a way that Reagan did. And again, it wasn't this idea of let's take away, let's contain communism. She really talked about communism as a moral wrong. And that was big because Europe really wasn't talking about this at times. So how did she fight communism? She confronted it. She didn't kind of not talk about it. She absolutely confronted it. And her nickname in Europe was called the Iron Lady. Perhaps you saw that movie. And that was huge at this time because it was another world leader that wanted to see communism end. So she was a staunch ally of Reagan and their idea trying to get it all squared away. Question number 11, what were the scientific advances that came from the Middle East? We have things that came from the Middle East like algebra, astronomy came from the Middle East as well. The calendar, as we talked about, was a scientific advancement that came from the Middle East. So those things that came from the Middle East. Question number 12, should be able to describe the Battle of Adram? No, you should not. What was the Wahhabi movement? The Wahhabi movement was a movement that occurred in the Middle East. And the Wahhabi movement was this idea that there needed to be this refocus on the original teachings of Islam. And so the Wahhabi movement really was gaining steam post-World War II in the sense that Islam kind of got away from its roots and needed to go back to it. And what the Wahhabi movement did as well is they opened up schools and teachings, not unlike a very good parallel to look at that would be the parallel between the Ignatius of Loyola and the Jesuits was kind of the same type of idea with the Wahhabi movement as Ignatius of Loyola. Teaching people's kind of going back to basics to an extent, and that was some of the stuff you see with the Wahhabi movement. Question number 14 here, what is nepotism? Nepotism is the idea that you are getting your job not based on what you know, but who you know. And this was a big problem during the time of Martin Luther and his quest to get rid of the corruption within the church and the Reformation. What Martin Luther said was that people, priests, other leaders of the church got their job because of who they knew, not what they knew. And this was a big problem. And so what Luther wanted to see is people get their jobs through perhaps tests, which some of your parents have today, which are called civil service tests. But the idea was to get their job not based on who they knew, but what they knew. So it's a big difference of how we do that today. Some cases we nepotism today. Who started the 30 Years' War? Not really important who started the 30 Years' War. I mean, technically, if you want to look at it, I guess it would be the Catholics that started the 30-Year War. But more important, as you know, is that the 30-Year War was the kind of full entrenched warfare that we see the Catholics and the Protestants not really coming back from. That this was kind of the point of no return. That there was this gap that was forever almost around this time frame. And so what we see here is it really reshapes the landscape of Europe as well, because we really start to see now areas and pockets that are going to become solely Catholic or solely Protestant or solely Lutheran or solely Huguenot. So we start to see this happen. So less important is who started it, probably the Catholics. What's more important is the fact that it was this entrenched warfare that happened, not entrenched in the sense of trenches like World War I, but instead fighting in the idea that you are doing a kind of Catholic versus Protestants, and that was what's going to happen in general. All right, question number 16. Who was Sir Thomas More? Sir Thomas More was a utopian thinker, and Thomas More was a man who kind of looked at religion as a way of trying to kind of have this higher calling, to use religion as a way to get closer to God, to have this higher calling to God. And Sir Thomas More wrote his book, The Utopia. And this is going to his utopia is going to really later on impact guys like Marx, not in the religious sense, but in the sense of trying to create this kind of like perfect idealistic society, or this quest to make this perfect idealistic society. And that is Thomas More. Question number 17, what did the Council of Trent do? The Council of Trent, one of the big things that it did was focus on trying to reform Catholicism. So what we have happen here is, we're looking at the order of it. We have the Catholics, we have the Reformation, and then after the Reformation, or at the same time as the Reformation, we have the Catholic Counter-Reformation. And that Catholic Counter-Reformation is huge, because what it shows is it shows the world, hey, or it shows Europe anyway, not the world, I guess. It shows Europe, hey, we're trying to clean up our own house. And that's what the Council of Trent did. The Council of Trent was a meeting between Catholics to try and cure Catholicism from its kind of ill wills. This is where we see Ignatius of Loyola. This is where we see, hey, Bibles can be in the vernacular. They don't have to be in Latin like they normally were. So all of these things are kind of a small nod to Catholicism. And the idea here is for the Catholics to say to the rest of the world, okay, we're making these reforms. Now you got to come back. Okay, you had your fun with this Protestantism, but now you got to come back. And for the Protestants, they didn't think it was enough. They thought that yeah, the Council of Trent might have been doing some good stuff, but it was not where it needed to be. So what we see with the Council of Trent is this idea of trying to fix the society of Catholicism, to try and kind of embrace a little bit of the Protestant, and to stop the runaway that the Protestants were doing at this time. All right, question number 18, who's Cardinal Richelieu? What did he do? What did he want? Cardinal Richelieu was the leader of the, an advisor to the King of France. And Cardinal Richelieu, as a cardinal, again, is supposed to be someone who is embracing Catholicism. But he's not embracing Catholicism as much as he's embracing being a French political leader. And what he does is he supports the Protestants during the 30 Years' War, not the Catholics. Now, this is big because, again, he's going against his religion in order to give France more power. So here's Cardinal Richelieu as a French guy going against the French Catholics and Catholicism in order to make France more powerful. So that's who Cardinal Richelieu was. And also the guy from the Three Musketeers. So check that out. Number 19, who stops the Ottoman at the siege of Vienna? Well, of course, the Venetians stop the Ottomans at the siege of Vienna. And this is huge because this stops the Ottoman advancements. The Ottomans are doing so well advancing through Europe. They have their cannons, they have their ceramic mugs, they got their coffee. They're doing all this great stuff. and they're advancing. However, they get to Vienna and they try to siege Vienna, which means they surround Vienna and they try and starve it out, but it does not work. And instead, the Ottoman advancement is stopped into Europe. And that's pretty big, because if they could have kept on going, gosh, who knows what would have happened in that regard. But the Ottomans were stopped by the Venetians at the Congress of, not the Congress, they were stopped by the Venetians for the siege of Vienna. Number 20, what was feudalism? Feudalism is not something that we cover in our time frame. That is World War. That is World War. That is World History 1. So that's not anything that we cover at this time. Question number 21, what does it mean to be militant? To be militant means that you are focusing a lot on the military. So if you are a militant leader, it is the idea that you might use violence to try and get your means. An antithesis, or the exact opposite of militant, would be the ideas of Gandhi, the ideas of the nonviolence of Gandhi, as well as the ideas of Dr. King and Mandela. They were nonviolent. However, there are other peoples that were militant at the time to try and get their ways. Not something that you see over there. All right, question number 22. Who gave the Iron and Blood speech? The Iron and Blood speech was, of course, given by Mr. Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck and the Funky Bunch, as it goes by. They were given the name, they were given the title, the Iron and Blood speech. And of course, that idea was that he was going to use iron, meaning, of course, the military, and blood, conquest, in order to expand the German Empire. And in fact, the German Empire will be united by iron and blood when the German Empire is united by a series of wars. And it's Otto von Bismarck who is the advisor, but the person who actually gets it, of course, is Wilhelm. And that is that. All right, question number 23. What was the Enclosure Act? The Enclosure Act was the act that occurred in Great Britain prior to the Industrial Revolution. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, the Enclosure, you had a bunch of farms that were small, little independent farms that were doing their own thing. Each farmer had their own little farm, and it was rather inefficient because multiple farmers might be growing multiple different crops in areas, and it led to a lot of inefficiency. Well, what happened with the Enclosure movement is the big farmers gobbled up the smaller farmers. And by gobbling up the smaller farmers and growing crops more efficiently, it kicked the farmers out of their traditional land holdings. And what they did by being kicked out of the traditional land holdings was that these farmers then had no place to go. So where'd they go? They went to the cities. And this is where the Industrial Revolution really gets into full force, because you need farmers, you need unemployed farmers willing to work for wages, and low wages at that, in order to expand the Industrial Revolution. And that's exactly what happens at this time, is we see the Industrial Revolution grow thanks to the fact that the farmers were not making as much money thanks to the Enclosure movement, because they got kicked out. So the Enclosure movement is going to lead to the Industrial Revolution. All right, question number 24. In the Treaty of Nanjing, what was diplomatic immunity? Diplomatic immunity in the Treaty of Nanjing was the idea that foreigners could go there and they would not be tried for crimes. That they could go to that area, and if they committed a crime, they had what was called diplomatic immunity, meaning they were not allowed to be charged for crimes. When you go to a country, if you're a diplomat, you are kind of focusing on political matters. You're not focusing on necessarily knowing what all the laws of the country are. And that's what they did in Nanjing, which they allowed, which of course we know today is Hong Kong, which is a major trading port. So the idea was that traders there and other diplomats were immune from that. The Battle of Verdun, of course, is not something that you need to be concerned of. Question number 26, what caused the Reign of Terror, and why was Louis XVI executed? The Reign of Terror was caused by the fact that you had an angry third class. Now, in the estates of the French, you really had the first class, which was your nobles, the second class, or first class was your clergy, second class was your nobles, and third class, your third estate was kind of the common everyday peoples, everybody else. Well, the problem was the third estate paid far more taxes. They really paid for the first and second estates. And this did not go over well because this third estate felt violated. They felt like they were only paying for laws. They felt like they were only doing stuff, and no one really doing anything to kind of help them out. So what they did is they rebelled, and a guy who was in charge of the Reign of Terror, of course, was Robespierre. And Robespierre was in charge of the Reign of Terror. And what we see happen here is the Reign of Terror is supposed to kind of be a time period in which the corrupt officials would be killed, the corrupt officials would be attacked, or what have you. But what happens is the majority of victims of the Reign of Terror were actually the third estate. So the third estate was the group of people that were killed far more so than anybody else, which is kind of sad. Why was Louis XVI executed? Louis XVI was executed because of the fact that he was considered corrupt, that he, like Louis XIV, kind of overspent. He was in this bankrupted economy. He didn't care about the needs of the lower class people. He didn't care about the needs of the third estate. And as a result, he got kicked out and he got beheaded. And that was his idea. Question number 27. If we have more questions after review, but I have a class before the SOL, can we write them down and ask you then? Yes, you may do that. 28. Chronologically speaking, which topics are usually the ones to get mixed up? The ones that usually get mixed up, I would say from a chronological perspective, are the battles of World War II are always tricky for people. Some of you that were in one period, I think it was period 3, where we did kind of what order came first. So World War II battles, people get mixed up. World War I, people get messed up as well with kind of the cause and the effects. I would say, as you guys have learned, kind of confusing the philosophers and what they did was an issue. I'm trying to think what else. But I think that's kind of, those are kind of the major ones that we've looked at so far this year. All right, question number 29. Can you post the summary readings for the contemporary world? Yes, I will do that after this review session. All right, there are no other questions that people asked. There are 29 of them, and we went through them in almost about a half hour or so. So hopefully people got more questions before we stop today, because again, this is supposed to be about an hour. So hopefully people came prepared with questions and all ready to go. So I'll stick around while you guys hopefully ask questions in that regard. So let's see if we can have some questions here that people have. All right, let's see if we got any more questions for today. We got, oh my goodness, a bunch of questions going on here. Someone's asking about, can you explain the Mideast mandates? The Middle East mandates were created after World War I. Britain and France were not very happy to be giving up their land ownings. They did not want to lose their empires. And so what they did is they made a sneaky little deal. And that sneaky little deal that they made was to try and hold on to their land. So they did something called the Mandate System, where Britain and France redrew the boundaries of the Middle East. Now, what they did is they drew boundaries on the defeated Ottoman Empire. And so when the Ottoman Empire was defeated, what they did was they took the map of the Ottoman Empire and kind of divided it for themselves. And Great Britain controlled the areas of Iraq, the areas of Jordan, the areas of what we know today as Palestine/Israel. And the French controlled what we know today as Syria and kind of just south of Ottoman. So if you want to look at it from this perspective, the British controlled, for the most part, the west, for the most part, probably the south, and the French controlled mostly the north, the northern part of the southern part of Turkey, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of what they controlled in that area. Syria was by far the biggest French mandate that they controlled, most important, one would say. And then the British controlled Iraq, and what we know today, of course, as Iraq, and we know today as Jordan and Palestine, as I mentioned, which of course is, and Palestine and Israel, which of course is important in that regards. All right. Next question is, what was the Battle of the Bulge and when was it fought? The Battle of the Bulge was fought at the very tail end of World War II. And the Battle of the Bulge was when the Americans had pushed to the western border of the German Empire. So they controlled the western part of the German Empire, or the German land area, and they're starting to push in. And what happens is, as they are pushing in, the Germans, with the Battle of the Bulge, have the very last advancement. They're the very last peoples to advance into out of Germany. And so the Battle of the Bulge was the last counteroffensive by the British at this, was the last counteroffensive by the Germans at this time. And that, of course, was the Battle of the Bulge. Critical because it was the last German offensive during World War II. Question number, I guess we're on 32 now, 32, 31. Who was Pol Pot? Pol Pot was the leader of a group called the Khmer Rouge, and the Khmer Rouge was started off as a utopian agrarian communist society. And what happened was a real devastating famine and a real devastating working conditions. And what's going to happen, we're going to see, thanks to Pol Pot, is we're going to see Pol Pot absolutely destroy those people in Cambodia. So Pol Pot committed genocide against the Cambodian peoples, him and his supporters, him and his military, called the Khmer Rouge was their name. And they will eventually destroy the Cambodian peoples. Pol Pot will eventually be arrested and charged with war crimes, and he will die not that many years ago, I don't think. So that was Pol Pot. Question number 33. Who was the leader of the Democratic armies in the Chinese Civil War? The Democratic armies in the Chinese Civil War were led by, and I wouldn't say democratic as much as I would say nationalists, and they were led by Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was in charge. If you remember correctly, there was a series of battles prior to World War I. The nationalists were beating the communists. The nationalists then fought World War II. Prior to World War II, the nationalists were defeating the communists. Then the World War II, the nationalists fought the Japanese. Eventually, they're going to run out of men in support, basically. The Japanese will lose. And then Mao resumes the Civil War. And by that time, the Chinese nationalists are too tired for fighting. The communists are well rested. And the communists will kick out the nationalists from mainland China to Taiwan, where, of course, they are still around today. Question number 34. What was the Boxer Rebellion? The Boxer Rebellion was a rebellion of Chinese peoples against foreigners that were coming into their country. And the Boxers, also known as the Society of Fighting Fists, were upset that the foreigners were coming into their country and kind of changing their lives and changing their culture and not really following what they need to do and all this other type of stuff. And so what we see here is the fact that the British are sorry, the British. The British are going to come in and they are going to take care of the Boxer Rebellion. So the Society of Fighting Fists, Society of Harmonious Fists is what they're sometimes called as well. They are taken out by the British, and that's important. It goes back to the Treaty of Nanjing, is what we're going to see as they come as a result of the Boxer Rebellion, in which there's going to be this trading port set up in Hong Kong, and they're going to be able to have diplomatic immunity and trade there. So it was not successful, was the Society of Harmonious Fists, otherwise known as Boxer Rebellion. I don't even know what question this is, but in any event, what was the most important geography you think we should know? Gosh, there's really no, it's so hard to say which important geography is the most. I would certainly be able to locate the major empires, the Mughals, the Ottomans, the explorers' routes that they made, I think would be huge. I think to know the geography of the Columbian Exchange would be big. I think I also think maybe knowing where some of the battles were, knowing where some of the newer countries are, like Sri Lanka and Pakistan and Bangladesh, I think would be important as well. Knowing which areas got independence. I mean, it's so hard. Anytime you see on your visible learning guides, locate, that's something you want to definitely be able to assure that you know in that regard. Who were the leaders of Russia in chronological order from the beginning of World II? Wow. What a question that is. Okay. So I guess we would start off from the ones that we have studied. We would start off with Peter the Great, followed by Catherine the Great. Then we'll jump ahead to go to Nicholas II. Then we'll go to Lenin. And then we'll go from Lenin to Stalin, Stalin to Khrushchev, Khrushchev, and then we'll take a little break for a little bit and go to Gorbachev, I guess. And then Gorbachev is the last leader of the Soviet Union, and then Yeltsin is the first leader of the what we know as Russia. And then, of course, after a while, we're going to see Putin. So there you go. What were all the variations of the name Huguenot from around the world, and who founded that religion? The Huguenot, so the religion actual name is John Calvin. John Calvin and the Calvinists are actually what we know as later on the Huguenots. But John Calvin is the leader of what's called the Calvinists. And the Calvinists' major belief is predestination. They believe in predestination. They believe that you know where you are going, where you are born. This idea of predestination. Now, what's important about this is that Calvinists are going to spread. In France, Calvinists are known as the Huguenots. In England, the Calvinists are known as the Puritans. And in Scotland, the Calvinists are known as the Presbyterians. So we have different levels for different areas because they did spread. For such kind of what we think of as strict religion, they did spread. But Calvinists definitely a strict religion in that sense. And that is that. So Calvinists start off, then they become Huguenots, France, then they expand, become Puritans in England, and then they go Presbyterians when they get to Scotland in that regard. All right, so we got about 15 minutes left or so. So if you do have some more questions, I'm curious to see who this other viewer is, because I see that G here is asking questions. I see here that Grace is asking questions. And apparently there's only one more viewer in our live presentation. Wow, three. Three viewers. Unbelievable. So, in any event, I'll give you another minute or two to answer some questions. And if you do have some more questions, we'll take those questions in a moment or two. If not, we will put this review session to bed. If you would like, you can look at other review sessions as well that are on here. A reminder, there's review sessions from all the units. There's also a review session from last year. If you wish to watch last year's review session as well, you can go ahead and do that. So you can do those things. Obviously, visible learning guides are on there. So take a look at those. We obviously have done a lot of review in terms of that stuff. So lots of other things we see here. All right. So let's see what else we beyond. Let's close that out. Let's go over here. All right. So do you mind reviewing the cities in the Aztec Empire? I think those are the ones that you are thinking of. Tenochtitlan is the only one that you'd be thinking of there, Grace, of the Aztec Empire. The Incan Empire, of course, was Peru. The Aztecs, conquered by Cortez, is who you'd be looking at in that regards. So you can see that. Gee, I somehow don't think you're super sad that this is the last review session. You accidentally put that smiley face upside down, not forward. So gotta go ahead here. I'll go ahead and fix that over here, so you can go ahead and there you go. I know that's your true feelings in that regard. In any event, Grace, the Aztec Empire really only had that one city, and that was Tenochtitlan. Pizarro, of course, is going to take over the Incas. Pizarro, Peru, takes over the Incas in that regard. So I'm not sure which cities in the Aztec Empire. I mean, they did have smaller cities, but nothing that we need to be concerned about for our particular exam. Okay. All right. So Grace and G and whoever that mystery person is out there, appreciate your viewing this, our very last online review session. For some of you, as I mentioned, this will be the last review session that you will ever have. So hopefully you enjoy the online review sessions. A reminder that this is on demand anytime, so you can watch it whenever you would like. And we will say good luck to you. And we will see you perhaps tomorrow, perhaps not tomorrow, but definitely on the day of SWL test. So for the final time, this is Mr. Swain signing off, saying, catch you down the road.